Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you as always for stopping by. Let me start with thanking Lamine Manjang and Sunil Koshal for an outstanding and very erudite dinner last night at the Capital Club. And it's always interesting speaking to people who've got a very global perspective. Lamine was the person who told me over dinner one night, when Donald Trump was a 1% chance to be president, that he had a much better chance than that. And he was very right. And he tends to be extremely interesting from a geopolitical, globalist point of view. So thank you to Lamine and to Sunil. Macro thought Spain's 5-year default probability jumps as Catalan referendum, sending the country into its biggest crisis since the end of the Franco dictatorship. And I think this fissure in Europe is not something that's going to be papered over easily. New quarter, old song. Dow just hit a fresh lifetime high. That's from Holger. Bitcoin rises as Goldman Sachs is weighing a new trading operation dedicated to Bitcoin and other digital currencies. It's up nearly 50% from where it swooned, you remember, to below 4,000. Why Britain is more reliant on the kindness of strangers than previously thought. This is the current account deficit, which is beginning to yawn wider. Home thoughts, let's get lifted. It's a photograph of Nairobi from Truth Slinger. Terrible situation in Las Vegas, and took me back to my honeymoon, where Nishit and I honeymooned in Las Vegas, the Grand Canyon and New Orleans. We started in a suite in the Desert Inn, which is an old hotel, but we had this fabulous suite. Desert Inn, also known as the DI, was a casino hotel on the Las Vegas Strip in Paradise, Nevada, which operated from April 24, 1950 to August 28, 2000, opened with 300 rooms, Sky Room restaurant, headed by a chef formerly of the Ritz Paris, which once had the highest vantage point on the Las Vegas Strip, and it was great fun, I must say. It's where Frank Sinatra sang for the first time. We then moved into the Mirage for New Year's Eve, which was like a Jack Kerouac stroke Hunter S. Thompson novel all at once. I'll put up a photograph of the Mirage. We watched a show which was Siegfried and Roy, who had these white tigers. One of them, I can't remember whom, whether it was Siegfried or Roy, was eaten by his white tiger subsequently. We flew into a massive storm as we went to see the Grand Canyon, and that was pretty remarkable as well. And that reminded me of one of my favorite songs, which is Touch the Sky by Kanye West. Have a look at the video, and it's all over the Grand Canyon. And we quaffed an obscene amount of oysters on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, which was what I enjoyed. Very sad event in Las Vegas. The shooting is now the deadliest mass shooting in US history. More than 50 are dead, 200 injured. I thought the latest number I saw was over 58. Las Vegas police have released the first picture of the gunman Stephen Paddock. There was very little in his background to make you think he would do such a thing. The Las Vegas shooting suspect fired at a crowd from the 32nd floor of a hotel where 2 windows are now broken. And the Las Vegas horror drives, all too predictable gun stop rally. Look, I don't know what more there's to be said about this. I mean, the US has had so many of these situations and just don't want to ban guns. And this is the cost of it. No laughing matter why Trump's words on North Korea matter. Tweeting from his golf resort in New Jersey on Sunday morning, the President of the United States disparaged the effort to find a diplomatic solution to the nuclear standoff with North Korea. I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man, Donald Trump wrote, using the nickname he has adopted to humiliate the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The president was responding to Tillerson's recent comment that the US is probing for diplomatic solutions via 2 or 3 channels to Pyongyang. In his tweets on Sunday, Trump belittled that strategy and suggested that he is more interested in military action. Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done. You can take the temperature of America's standoff with North Korea in several ways. Some indicators are reassuring. Were North Korea actually preparing to reduce the United States to ashes and darkness, as it recently suggested that it was? American intelligence would be picking up signs of movement, say ground forces breaking out, ammunition or an uptick in traffic across electronic command and control channels, and saying basically they're not. And this was the point when I was talking about language and saying Kim is also speaking the language his adversaries understand lucidly. When you view things from Kim the Rocket Man's perspective, you might appreciate that far from being illogical, he is in fact being ruthlessly logical. And he is speaking the language his adversaries understand lucidly. 10 million folks in Seoul, just 60 kilometers from the border, 28,500 US soldiers are all in the line of fire. Olli Heinonen, who's the former IAEA expert, tells us, BBC Panorama that is, most likely North Korea has the capacity to hit the US with nuclear weapons. My attention was caught by this tweet from Paul Mason News, elect a clown. Look at what it says. And that's what my piece was a little bit about, living in a populist world. I was talking about extraordinary popular delusions, and the madness of crowds is an early study of crowd psychology by Charles Mackay, first published in 1841. Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. So the wave of populism has crisscrossed the world. President Putin is, of course, the arch-populist, but Erdogan, Duterte, Narendra Modi are all mini-me's to Vladimir. Populist policy-making reminded me of a passage from T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. And I said the shadow to which T.S. Eliot is referring is this: President Trump's tax cut is presented as good for the average American taxpayer, but it is patently skewed in favor of the 1%. Narendra Modi's attempt to cleanse the black market economy via the extinguishing of banknotes was an abject failure. Duterte's red in tooth and claw assassination program against drug dealing has trampled over any human rights. The King of Saudi Arabia has generously allowed women to drive themselves around from 2018. I said, just let that sink in. President Trump, in his mind-boggling speech at UNGA, said this of Venezuela: the problem in Venezuela is not that socialism has been poorly implemented, but that socialism has been faithfully implemented, he said. I said, change the word socialism for populism. And in fact, Caracas is the harbinger of the direction in which the world is headed. And I left the last words to Charles Mackay: of all the offspring of time, the error is the most ancient, and is so old and familiar an acquaintance that truth, when discovered, comes upon us like an intruder and meets the intruder's welcome. I found this interesting. We're at the beginning of a new political phase in which the battle to defeat ISIS is being replaced by a power struggle between Arabs and Kurds. Once the KRG dreamed of becoming a new Dubai with gleaming malls and hotels, but since 2014 it has looked more like Pompeii. Let's move on to the currency markets because there's lots going on. The euro dipped momentarily below 117, is now at 117.37. Dollar index, when I looked last, had popped nicely over that key level of 93.50. When I checked, it was at 93.82. Japanese yen 113.09. Swiss franc 0.9768. The pound, which not too long ago was above 136, is now at 132.75. The Australian dollar 0.7810, but the central bank tried to talk down the dollar in the early hours. India rupee 65.585, South Korean won 1147.88, Brazilian real 3.1549, Egyptian pound 17.5980, and the rand 13.6331. Dollar index, I'll put up a one-year chart, and the question is, have we finally hurdled that key level of 93.50? And if we have, then I think this dollar rally will gain more traction. This is the euro's performance since the Catalan vote, thanks to business. And here's a euro-dollar chart from T Commodity. My target is 114.50. T Commodity turned bullish at 117. Commodity markets, gold, let's take a look. That's really come off quite dramatically, last at 12.70. Crude oil, this is interesting, $50.73 WTI. And, I changed my view on that, and I think we got up to about 55 before we slipped back again. These stocks have surged 400% this year, but the best may be yet to come. From these two companies, the best may well yet be to come. Graphite India and HEG Limited are leading manufacturers of graphite electrodes, an essential component of electric arc furnaces that turn scrap into steel. They're up more than 400% since the start of January. Sub-Saharan Africa hopes dim for Zimbabwe's economy. For Zemi, 43 years old, it was a worrying sign that Zimbabwe's long-running economic collapse could be heading for another vicious spiral of basic shortages, hyperinflation, and social chaos. His heart sank as he drove on, hoping to refuel at the next station. But at least 40 other cars were queuing for fuel. Immediately I was reminded of 2008 when we slept in fuel queues and I prayed silently that we don't return to those days. And this is all about how inflation peaked at 500 billion% before the Zim dollar was abandoned in favor of the US dollar. And the economy never recovered. Fears of a repeat of those desperate days have grown in recent weeks, and panic buying has made prices rocket. Stockpiling has been driven by a collapse in confidence in the parallel bond note currency that was launched by President Mugabe's regime nearly a year ago. In theory, bond notes are worth the same as US dollars, but consumers worry that they will become worthless like the old Zimbabwe dollar, which was scrapped in 2009. We are already witnessing shortages of basic commodities. Currency traders in Harare now offer to exchange $1 for 1.37 bond notes, an illegal transaction. For non-cash bank transfers, the traders offer to pay 1.50 in bond notes for $1. Further economic breakdown could reignite protests that shook Mugabe's regime last year. There are those eager to manipulate the currency so that they can trigger inflation and cause panic buying, he said. In July 2016, I said countries like Zimbabwe feel they are right at the edge, an edge that Hunter S. Thompson described. The edge, there is no honest way to explain it because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over. Zimbabwe dollar dearth causes shortages, return of inflation. That's Bloomberg reporting on the same lines. Since 1960, the population of most of those countries would have grown by 10 times by 2050. This is Africa, and the challenge that so many African countries are facing. South African all shares up 10.12% this year. Dollar versus rand last trading at 13.6331. Death of the Nile is an article in the Telegraph. Egypt fears Ethiopian dam will cut its water supply. Nile is different. Few nations rely so completely on a single river as much as Egypt does. The Nile provides over 90% of Egypt's water supply. Almost the entire population lies cramped in the sliver of the Nile Valley. Around 60% of Egypt's Nile water originates in Ethiopia from the Blue Nile, one of the two main tributaries. Egypt hardly gets by with the water it does have. It has one of the lowest per capita shares of water in the world, some 660 cubic meters a person. So this is going to be a big challenge for them going forward. The Egyptian pound is at 17.5980. Nigerian all shares up 31.87% this year. Interesting article in the New York Times. Booming Ghana gets fat on KFC. KFC has really conquered Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africans love chicken. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 38.26% year to date. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange is the best performing stock market in Africa, if not the world. It's up 113.5% in the last 3 months. Moving on to Kenya. The police fired tear gas at opposition protesters in Nairobi, not too far outside my window. The opposition is protesting over the electoral body impasse. Began protests in the western city of Kisumu to press the demands for an overhaul of the electoral authority before a rerun of an annulled presidential election. Police fired tear gas to disperse NASA protesters, while anti-riot police were stationed outside the headquarters of the IEBC in anticipation of demonstrations. And NASA, led by Raila, is taking to the streets after quitting talks with the Commission to discuss its demands for reform. The coalition is ready to turn up in the streets until its demands are met, they said. Another photograph here as well. We have no other option but to take the battle to the people, Odinga said at a press conference on Thursday. Look, he said, I call upon this generation to resist. They must arise and resist and attempt to try and take them back to the eras of single-party dictatorship. We're calling our people to action, he said. Jubilee NASA hardliners face visa bans, say envoys. The University of Nairobi is being closed indefinitely. Look, the opposition, I think, are running an asymmetric strategy, which is to take it to the street, a la Paul Virilio. But I expect the ruling government to win a bigger majority this time around. The opposition, the worst risk I'm reading is a boycott and then trying to degrade the result of the election. Have a look at the performance of the Kenya Eurobond 2024. Interesting article in Quartz Africa. Nairobi builds shiny new business districts, but not enough tenants have shown up, particularly in Upper Hill, where we've got these fantastic buildings. Occupancy is around 60%. Nairobi all shares up 20.87% year to date. NSE 20 is up 17.13% year to date. Once again, I'm terribly grateful that you stopped by.